Can you talk a little bit more about how brands successfully measure content performance?
Sure. So the cool thing about right now is that you can actually talk to anybody you want, but you can't talk to them in terms of the way you would expect to talk to them. You have to talk to them in the way that they would expect you to talk to them. So that is obviously the way that we deploy content. So if you think about all the different mechanisms we have, you can do it through Instagram, through YouTube, through Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, you name them. There's so many different forms of engaging with people or getting something in front of people. The great thing about this is that you can put something in front of people right away and know how bad it is. And you know how good it is, just the same. So one of the things that we always look for is, and it's a big philosophy in terms of our thinking at Amplify, is what is that engagement rate? And when do we analyze when the content is actually working for you instead of your dollars working for you? So what we like to see is how do we take content, put it in front of the right people? How do we identify those people that are engaging, so aka the engagement rate is high enough that we can focus on those individuals or on those audiences that are resonating with the content, and then introduce the next piece of content that identifies even clearer with those individuals to see what that engagement rate is. And if it's working, those engagement rates should go up because you're getting more specific, you're getting more tailored. And then as you go through that process, you'll start seeing that more shares, you'll start seeing that more media is being earned from that paid buy. And obviously we're more in the paid space because Facebook and Twitter and such have actually changed the landscape to say you actually have to pay to play now. No longer can you just have a Facebook page with some fans and say, hey, you can just post something, you're going to access those people. So they've figured that out, and so now you actually have to spend dollars to actually get things in front of people, which is, falls in line with everything else. But you can easily stop it, you can easily continue with it, and then the journey from how you get them into your platform or into your content, whatever form or medium it is, the metrics that you see on that end become the most important thing. Because you want to make sure that as people come in, they're sharing from there, they're commenting, they're engaging. Bounce rate is such an important metric to consider, because if you're paying $7 for a very expensive click to someone to come to your content, and 70% of the people are bouncing, you should stop right away, because that's not working for you. So as people come in, as people start engaging with your content, you need to know that there's that sticky factor. You need to know that they're actually reading, and you do those through. There's so many different metrics and analytics. Again, I'd like to look at it just from the engagement rate. What's the engagement rate on the content in each platform? So from social, in terms of deploying it, even to the site itself, what's that engagement rate? So as you see those, then you know that you have a better chance of actually having successful content, because the more you serve, the engagement rate goes up.
And what sort of metrics are the brands that you're working with? What are they looking at? What should they be looking at? And what are the challenges in terms of shifting their thought?
A lot of times they are focused on those impressions. So whether it's social impressions or media impressions, it's interesting to, we still, especially working, say, with a C-suite, a CEO, they still want to get on the front page of the National Post, for example, right? That is huge for them.
In a good way, right? In a good way.
In a good way, yes, absolutely. But for us, it's really looking at, are our communications programs having an effect on their bottom line? So as I mentioned before, something like a net promoter score, the brand awareness. Are we moving the bar at all with all of these things that we're actually doing? So the problem we have oftentimes working with some brands is that they don't necessarily know how we can get that information. So right now, one of my clients, we are working on creating a survey, basically going out in market 3 times a year to see, okay, we don't actually know where we're at today. We have really successful communications programs, but we don't know what has this meant for the brand in Canada. And so we're going to be replicating that for the same client in the US as well, because we don't know what we don't know. And so we need to get there so that we can start measuring things that really actually matter. And then course correcting, right? It is sort of that agile sort of approach, and once we're learning lessons, that we actually do apply them to the way that we're actually communicating with our audiences.
Yeah, and when it comes to measurement, one of the great things, and we've talked about this, is the ability to be agile, right? To change course and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to just turn that around a bit and say there's also something to be said for endurance, right? For sticking to the program. Particularly when you're trying to sell something, when it's direct conversion is your KPI, maybe less so, but especially for thought leadership, you need to establish the franchise a little bit. And we've seen that with some of our work with one client who's been, we're doing a campaign for a couple of years now. We've actually seen engagement go up over time as the asset becomes established in readers' minds, and also what it is, right? Because a
Yeah.
lot of times you look at it and you go, what the heck is this, right? So you need to, repetition is good for recall and also for legitimacy. So you have to strike a balance between sticking to it and changing tack.
What's the perspective, Darren, within an organization evangelizing content marketing and the types of metrics that are meaningful, that draw good
Well,
insight?
it's a really good question because for those of us that have been on the front line of the battle, to try to, I remember when we were at Brighter Life and we launched, and then I was at a conference and somebody asked me that question, saying, well, so I guess you've convinced the whole, it's not like you get into a room with like the whole C-suite and all the marketing team and all the stakeholders and you say, you do like a 20-slide deck on content marketing and everyone nods their head, okay, we're good, you've got funding for the next 15 years. It's like, it's just, you have to constantly prove it out and evangelize it and so on, because if you're in a brand that's doing it, you might be part of a team that's at like mile 15 of understanding the strategy of content marketing, and you've convinced a couple other people early stage, and they're at like mile 2, and then you say goodbye to them and you go off and do your business. And, my credo is evangelize early, often, and never stop. Like, go back to them shortly. Hey, look, this is what we learned. And to your point, Joe, like, it's not like you come in and show metrics, but this didn't really work, so we're going to completely stop doing this. No, we're going to learn something from it. Sometimes you do stop something, but if your content plan is really about having a cadence of content that goes out there, you're constantly trying to optimize like you would any other kind of communication strategy. But yeah, I think it's still, it's been around forever. When you go to Content Marketing World down there in Cleveland, they always bring out the example of The Furrow, which was a magazine that John Deere created in the 1800s for farmers about farming. So it didn't have any of, there were pictures of their tractors if they were talking about plowing or whatever, but the point was that was true content marketing. But it's still, in the way it exists today, it's still relatively new to a concept. It's not fully understood. And, social did change quite a bit. And, we've had, I've had conversations with senior executives who thought we should still be chasing fans and followers. Right. And we had to explain about why that's no longer relevant and so on. So no one's ever at the same place you are. So keep talking to them about it.
Yeah.
So surveys obviously are the easiest way to kind of get to gauge, what's happening and how people feel about certain things, because obviously they're telling you when you directly ask them. But in reality, every single piece of content you put out there is actually its own survey. The touch points that you analyze, but from how people interact with that, tells you everything you need to know to start your next piece of content. And that comes to say, your bounce rates, your percentage of video viewed, the amount of people that share it on LinkedIn versus the amount of people that share it on Facebook, identifying whether something's a little bit more professional in nature or something's a little bit more personal in nature. So think about everything you put out there as a survey, and you should analyze all the data. And again, there's so much data, but analyze the data to say, what does this tell us about the people that have engaged with this, so that we can make the right choices as we go forward. And sometimes one piece of content leads into like 3 or 4 or 5, and they go off in different branches or different verticals. So that's something you have to consider. You can't always stay on the same form and the same message with each thing. It could break out, so you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and getting back to your question, Derek, that is a hugely powerful thing, that data, when you're trying to be an ambassador for content marketing for your department or for your client, right? Where you can actually show them, how the data support the value of what you're doing, which they may or may not understand.